Hi kids! As we grow up, you may have noticed that humans do some silly things in life, like not being able to find the remote ever. It's like this remote has legs of its own because I can never find it when I need it. Or have you worked really hard on your homework only to forget to turn it in? How about this? Every single time you wash your clothes, somehow one sock goes missing. See? Silly things in life that happen all the time. But kids, what if the silly things we do in life are much, much worse than losing the remote or losing a sock? What if the silly things we do in life actually make us miserable for a long, long time? The fact of the matter is, there are many silly things that humans do that actually make us miserable. And yet we continue to do it. And you might wonder, well, why would we do something if they make us miserable? Right? And yet, we do this all the time. In the next 4 weeks, I'm going to talk about 4 silly things we do in life that actually make us terribly unhappy and miserable. And the first silly thing that we do that make us unhappy, we're going to talk about is ignoring rules. Boys and girls, oftentimes we think rules are boring and we don't want to listen to them because we want to do what we want to do. But did you know that when we continue to ignore rules, that ends up making our lives more miserable? This is especially true when it comes to God's rules. Today we're going to look at David's prayer from Psalm 119 verses 97 to 104, where David models for us how we should think of God's rules and what our attitude towards them should be. So, without further ado, here is Eden, who is going to read today's passage for us.
Oh, how I love your law. I meditate on it all day long. Your commands are always with me and make me wiser than my enemies. I have more insight than all my teachers, for I meditate on your statutes. I have more understanding than the elders, for I obey your precepts. I have kept my feet from every evil path, so that I might obey your law. I have not departed from your laws, for you yourself have taught me. How sweet are your words to my taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth. I gain understanding from your precepts. Therefore I hate every wrong path.
Thank you so much, Eden. And wow, you guys, did you notice David begins his prayer by saying, "Oh, how I love your law." Here, David says he loves God's laws so much that he thinks about them all day long. Kids, do you think about God's law all day long? You know, I tried, and it isn't easy. So how is it that David is able to meditate on God's law all day long? No one made him do it. He's not being tested on these laws. He's not studying so he can pass an exam either. David is thinking about God's law all day long because he wants to, and he loves them. And at this point, we have to ask the question, why does David love God's law so much? What's so awesome about them that he would think about them all the time? Thankfully, David gives us an answer in verses 98 to 100. Here, David says 3 things about God's laws. First, he says, "Your commands are always with me and make me wiser than my enemies." Boys and girls, David was a warrior. He was a soldier. And during his time, Israelites were always having to fight their enemies, especially the Philistines. And that means that you have to go to war, fight your enemies, and you have to think about what's the best way to win. And here, David says that he is wiser than his enemies because he follows God's commands. Boys and girls, that is right. When we follow God's commands that He gives us, those commands actually make us wiser. It helps us make right decisions in life. And that is why David, as a soldier and a warrior, loves God's law. Let's continue on. In verse 99, he says, I have more insight than all my teachers, for I meditate on your statutes. Statutes is another word for rules. Here, David says that he has more insight than his teachers because of God's rules. Boys and girls, ever since David was a young boy, he was wise and insightful, and he knew the right thing to do. Do you remember how David fought Goliath even as a young person? The reason he was able to make those decisions that adults couldn't make, that even his teachers couldn't make, is because he cherished God's law, and that was number one on his heart. And that made David wiser than all of his teachers. The third reason why David loves God's rules is because it gives him understanding. Look with me at verse 100. Here he says, I have more understanding than the elders, for I obey your precepts. And precepts is another word for God's rules. Boys and girls, David was a king, and he had to make many decisions for the entire country of Israel. He was very responsible for so many things. And he realized that obeying God's rules gave him more understanding than everyone else. And here, there's something very important we have to know about God's rules. You see, God did not give us rules to control us or to make our life boring or to show us who's boss. God gave us rules so we would know how life works and be able to enjoy life. God's rules give us the knowledge and the power to enjoy life as it should be enjoyed. Not sure what I mean by that? Well, I have a few examples to share with you. You see, life is a lot like Roblox, playing an instrument like cello, basketball, and making friendship bracelets. Well, let me tell you how. One thing all of these things have in common is that they have rules that you have to follow. Think about Roblox. I heard that you guys love to play games on it, so I actually made an account and I went in. And I realized that there are many instructions to follow. It tells me what I need to do and how to play. But here's a problem. I don't know how to play video games at all. I just can't play them. I don't know how to play them at all. And if I wanted to enjoy Roblox, I would have to learn how to move around within the digital space. If I learned how to do it, then I could probably enjoy these games like Resort Tycoon number 2 and, feeding your pet and samurai games that you guys play on here. What if I ignore those rules? What if I said, I'm going to just not look at any of these rules, I'm going to just play it my way? Well, you know what happens? This happens. I get nowhere. I am stuck and I have no idea how to get out. You see, life is like that. God has instructions and rules about how we can live life. If we ignore those instructions, this is what happens in life. We get nowhere. We won't know why we're doing what we're doing, what the purpose of life is, and as you can see, not have a lot of fun. Whether it's Roblox or life, we have to follow the rules, and that is what makes us happy. Here's a second example. Cello is a beautiful instrument, and when you learn it, you can experience its beauty. But you know what? Cello and all the other instruments are difficult to learn. There are many rules to follow. You have to learn where to place your fingers, you have to learn how to sit, and you have to learn how to bow in the right direction. Those are rules of cello. What if you ignore those rules? What if you tried to play cello like you would play a violin? Well, clearly, there wouldn't be very much nice cello playing going on. Another example, basketball. You guys all know that basketball has certain rules to follow. You have to stay within the court. You cannot double dribble. You cannot travel. You cannot foul. And you definitely can't kick the ball. But what if you ignore those rules of basketball and played however you wanted? At first, you may feel like you're so great and no one can tell you what to do. But soon enough, no one's going to want to play with you. Because if you travel with the ball and don't follow rules, people will say, that's not what you do. If you kicked the ball instead of bouncing it, obviously other people are not going to have fun playing with you and you won't be able to play for very much longer. Even when we do an arts craft like making the friendship bracelets, you have to follow the rules. All of these designs have different patterns that you have to learn and follow. What if you decided, I hate rules. I'm just going to do whatever I want and that's how I'm going to be. Guess what you will end up with? You will end up with this. And that doesn't look very nice at all, does it? Boys and girls, life is just like this. God set rules to life because He is the creator. Remember, He designed us. He knows how we work and He knows how the world works. And He tells us how to succeed in life in the Bible. So a very silly thing to do would be to ignore that. When we ignore those rules, at first we think we are living the life of our dreams, but we will end up making ourselves very, very miserable because nothing will work out. Kids, life is a lot like a Rubik's Cube. There are so many moving parts, and at first it doesn't look like there's any pattern to it. But you know that there is a certain way it needs to look if you want to solve it. And if I were to just do whatever I want and move things however I want, at first things might look like they're lining up, but inevitably you're going to get stuck. And you will never be able to solve this just doing random things. The only way to solve the Rubik's Cube is to learn the rules of it. You have to understand what series of movements and actions bring this Rubik's Cube to work. And kids, life is just like that. There are many, many moving parts to it, and at first, we don't know what to do with it. At first, life seems so confusing because it's like, how am I supposed to go through school in quarantine? How do I treat people who are mean to me? I don't want to obey my parents. What should I do? How should I manage my time? How should I manage my relationships? How should I eat? What time should I go to bed? The decisions we make in life are very, very complex, like a Rubik's Cube. But you know what? When we start to obey God's rules in life one at a time, you will realize that you will start to solve the puzzle one at a time and start to get to a solution. There are so many rules that God gives us to give us hints to life. Some of them that I can think of right now are: love your neighbor as yourself. Fear God, and you will not fear anything else. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Gentle words turn away anger. Honor your mother and father. Keep the Sabbath holy and rest one day a week. Honor God by tithing 10% of your earnings. Do not repay evil with evil. Don't judge or you will be judged. You see, there's so many rules that God gives us, not to control us and make our lives miserable, but so that we will understand how life works and be able to enjoy it. You see, God wants us to enjoy the life that He designed for us. And the best thing we can do to start enjoying that life is by learning and following those rules that God set for us. So what is the first silly thing that we do in life that we should stop doing as soon as possible? It is ignoring rules. I pray that you will become wiser and you will gain more understanding about how to go through this life. Have a great week, you guys.